really nice to meet you. As we see, you got a really nice background.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, my name is Safar, and with me today is Abrar. So we will be hosting you today. As I said, really glad to see you one more time. Thanks for your time and for your contribution. So I
Oh, you're welcome.
guess, but by the way, is it okay if we record the meeting?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Um, so I will briefly explain what we'll be having today, I guess. First, we will introduce you, and then we will move to ask you some personal and work related questions to get to know you and your works better. Then we will focus on one of your research works, which will be attraction versus persuasion, information provision in search markets. And then we'll move to the third part, which is relative performance concerns among investment managers. So I guess we will introduce the guest. Professor Mark Whitmeyer is today's guest. He's an assistant professor of economics at Arizona State University. So Professor Whitmeyer works in microeconomic theory, especially information design, pricing, and game theory, studying how firms reveal or hide information, how prices steer our choices, and how people decide under risk and uncertainty. In short, he uncovers the rules behind what we are shown, what we pay, and why we choose. So one more time, really glad to see you here, Professor Whitmer, and I guess we can start with the part one.
Yeah, it's good to be
So yeah,
here.
all right. So my first question would be about what first drew you to the field of economics. Was there some open eyes moment or something like that that first got you involved in this field?
Um, I I actually don't know. I um, Actually, in a sense, I ended up kind of accidentally in economics. So my high school didn't have economics, and I knew nothing about it. And probably what I did know was wrong because at the time, outside of economics, you think economics, and you just think like I don't know, stocks and unemployment and inflation, and I mean these are parts of economics, but of course these are wildly different to what I do now. So anyway, so I knew nothing about economics, and I was going to go to university college in the U.S. and my parents said, well, you have to pick a serious major. It has to be a major that's quantitative or at least a science somehow. Um, and I just happened to pick economics because I didn't want to do physics and I didn't want to do one of the lab sciences and um, so it was really between economics and math, and then I I knew very little about economics. So I picked economics. So it was as kind of simple as that. There wasn't a great reason that I picked it, other than it was a serious thing. And then later down the road, when I was an undergrad, I took game theory, and I liked that class a lot. So I mean, in some sense, the first foray into economics was pure chance, but then I really did like game theory, and so this is what I kind of decided that I wanted to do. Um, so that's my answer. It was pure luck.
Yep, interesting.
Got it. Thank you so much. And my next question would be, so our listeners are mainly high school students and early college
Mm-hmm.
students interested
Mm-hmm.
in economics and related fields. So, could you name any choices or habits that could compound into better career outcomes and academic outcomes? And what advice also is overrated?
Yeah, I think, um, yeah, these are good questions. I think, I think economics, like many disciplines, is becoming um, more and more of a discipline where um, it seems like it selects for people who have known they have wanted to do um, economics for a very long time, which I actually don't think this is a good thing. I'm it's a bit worrying that you have to have your life figured out when you're in high school in order to kind of succeed in an area. Um, I mean, I'm not saying I don't think that's quite true, but I think it's becoming more important to know what you want to do. Um, that said, I think that you can still find success in the area even if you weren't aware that this is what you wanted to do early on. It's still possible, but maybe the road will be a bit more difficult. I think, and this is for economics in particular, I think, it's it's still very math based, and so I think having a very strong math background is valuable, and I think um, this is something that uh, grad school admissions folks look for, at least this kind of minimum standard of mathematical competency, because it's still, no matter what field you're in economics, it still has this, everything is still based on theory, which is written in the language of math. Some things that are not so important, that's a tough question. I'm just trying to think. I think, what's not so important? Frankly, I think one of the things that's maybe not so important is well, I don't know.
Maybe learning programming could help somehow, or no? How do you think?
Yeah, so that's actually that's a really good suggestion. So I think pro I think programming, especially now that things like ChatGPT are so good, I don't think this is very important at all, because all the people. So I personally do not do any coding, but all the people I know who do, who analyze data, and so have to do statistical analysis with these various programs. All of them have a setup with multiple monitors, and one of the monitors has ChatGPT open just to help them develop code. So I think, so I think that's actually a really great thing you brought up. I think AI has just gotten so good. I think it's less important that you know how to code, and more important that you're able to work with this other auxiliary thing that does know how to code. So I would say that's not so important. I'm a bit the wrong person to talk to about coding, because I I've never analyzed data in my life, and so um, um, yeah.
Got it, got it. Thank you so much, anyways.
All right. So, Professor Whitmeyer, our next question would be about choosing the questions for the research projects. So, it is quite a scarce time problem. So, it takes up a lot of time to choose the right question. And what filters do you apply when picking some projects? Do you look for social value, maybe data access, or career risk, or just the stuff that you're interested in? And how do you weigh them? Uh, yeah.
Um, okay, so this has changed a bit over my career. So the first papers I wrote, the first few papers, were, I think, quite incremental. Um, and so there it was, building off of papers I had encountered in the literature and had liked. Um, and then and then for each of these things, there had been something that had interested me, some assumption or some part of their setup that had interested me, and I had wondered about it, and this kind of curiosity led to this extension that later became part of a paper. But fundamentally, it was still building off something um, that I had encountered in the literature. So it wasn't like I was seeing something in the real world and wondering about it. As I have written more papers and gotten just more experience and whatnot, it has become much less literature driven and more just kind of abstract curiosity, where I had just wondered about something and um, just some phenomenon I thought I saw in the world, or some aspect of behavior that I thought was interesting, and then in thinking about it and in trying to understand it, I ended up getting, writing papers. Um, so, but still throughout, still this is being driven by mostly just by what I thought was interesting. So even early on, when I was building off of other people's work, or more directly building off of other people's work, the guiding thing is what I thought was interesting. That said, um, you know, when you do economic theory, um, you have a very big constraint, which is uh, you have to look at things that are interesting, but you also have to be able to, solve them. You also have to be able to prove things. And so you have this constraint of, what's interesting, conditional on me being able to say something. And, for everyone in theory, this what you can prove constraint is you come up against it a lot. So many times I've started on something interesting and then just gotten to a point where I could go no further, just because it just gets very hard, and there's just nothing you can do. So I would say, um, um, throughout all of this, anyone who does economic theory, they're always going to have um, this component of their research, which is that uh, they look at things for whatever reason, but these things have to be able to be tractable, and tractability um, is in a sense quite rare. Um, um, I am. I've never written anything. Actually, well, that's not true. So I'm working on things now, and I've very recently worked on things with an eye toward data. I was going to say that I had never done things with data in mind, but that's changed. So I have done a little of this lately, but this has been kind of a next step in kind of my career. And then you also mentioned like social good, I think. You mentioned social good, and you mentioned like professional success. I don't think I've ever really pursued a question for the social good. Really, what's been interesting to me has been the driver. Professional success, of course. I mean, I think this is where this is kind of the flip side of tractability, in the sense that the profession rewards tackling difficult problems, and so this has kind of guided various things that I've pursued, just because I've thought that it's a cool enough problem that people would like it.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. So you mentioned that works could slow down sometimes, and my next question is based on that. So obviously, uh, like big research papers takes years to write, and obviously your motivation could shrink down over time. So could you provide any example on did you have that case when you had stumbled upon this, and what did you do? Like, did you change the question, your team, or data maybe?
Yeah, so this happens a bunch. So I do, and I have done various things. So I think one of the things that lots of times I've found when I get stuck, just taking time away to kind of forget a little bit about how you've been thinking about it, the problem, is helpful. But it has to, the trick is, it has to be, you have to spend long, at least for me, you have to spend long enough time away to kind of really then revisit it with fresh eyes. So lots of papers I've written have been like this. The paper you mentioned, Attraction versus Persuasion, there I essentially set it aside for 2 years before getting the crucial result. Lots of other things were like this. And then this is in turn why I like to have a lot of projects going at the same time, because what you don't want to set aside something you've been working on and then do nothing, right? So whenever I set aside something because I'm stuck, I then move to something else, work on that, and then maybe eventually I'll get stuck on that too, but then enough time has elapsed I can go back to the first thing and see it with a fresh pair of eyes. So I think this is really common. I think most of the things I've worked on have been have had periods of being stuck, sometimes very long periods of being stuck, and then each time I think it's been really helpful to just step away and revisit it with fresh eyes. And related to this, so this is basically all you can do when you're by yourself. On the other hand, lots of things are collaborative. So I have co-authors on various papers, and so sometimes you'll be stuck on something, and then a co-author will look at it, and they'll have the fresh eyes, and they'll be able to get it, and vice versa. So there have been other things where I've been working on one result in particular for a paper. I've gotten stuck. I write my co-authors, say, this is what I've gotten. They look at it and they solve it right away, because they have these fresh eyes. They're not locked into these kind of paths of thinking that I had found myself in. So co-authors are very, very good for this as well. Anything else about that? Yeah, and I mean, there's also just, so I said, you're stuck and maybe it's best to set it aside. You also kind of have to know when to set it aside, because sometimes you just have to think about things for a long time and just, it feels like you're getting nowhere, but you have to convince yourself that you really are getting somewhere. And so there have been times when I've made no progress despite working on something for a long time, and then suddenly I think of something. So this is another thing. Sometimes you just have to pretend that you're not stuck and keep thinking about it until you can get it.
Thanks a lot. So my last question for the part one would be, looking forward, what big questions in economics really excite you the most and keep you curious?
Yeah, that's uh, um, a very good question. Let me think about this for a second. Okay, so I don't know if this is big. I don't know if this is interesting to other people, or how small the set of other people who would find this interesting is. But one of the things I've done in the last few years is I've been interested in updating. So I've been interested in people reacting to information. So how they change their beliefs based on observing new information. So I have a few papers already on this about some basically various questions on what happens when you violate Bayes' law. I think there's a lot more to do regarding updating and reacting to new information. I have a paper in progress that I'm really excited about that tries to come up with measures of disagreement about models. So like maybe people are updating differently because they just think they've seen different information. And so I have a paper that's trying to explain how to think about that, and it kind of connects to these classical things in information economics. Another thing I find really interesting is that when people are reacting to new information, experimentally at least, people tend to underreact. Compared to the Bayesian standard, people's beliefs tend to be closer to their prior than they ought to be. But it turns out that this underreaction is really not specific to updating at all, but it's specific to lots and lots of things. You can think of probability weighing as a form of underreaction. You can think of the way people effectively discount in dynamic problems. It looks like underreaction. Anyway, my point is, in all these spheres of the decision making, it seems like underreaction is common, and it certainly seems like it's the modal form of mistake. So I've been working on something in this direction as well, trying to explain why underreaction seems to be what why when people make errors, it's underreaction. What could be the cause of that? Why might that be beneficial? Um, um, so anyway, I'm not sure how interesting this is. I'm definitely not sure how big this is, but this is something I find particularly interesting and um, and of course I hope others do too. But
Yeah, dear professor, it's quite niche and interesting. So yeah, thanks for the answers. I guess we can move to the part two now. So in the part two, we will discuss the work of attraction versus persuasion, information provision, and search markets. So I will briefly explain the context of the work, its results, findings, and then we'll move on to the questions. Um, so yeah, this paper studies how firms decide what to show you while you're searching. So think of hotel or let's say laptop shopping. So sellers face two pulls. So the first one is attraction. So attraction means revealing which details to win your first click. Um, versus persuasion. Persuasion is shaping information so you stop searching and buy here. So the model shows that in competitive markets, especially when average quality is quite decent and top notch, firms disclose more, making pages transparent and helpful. In tougher settings, on the other hand, disclosure becomes mixed. So some listings are clear, others are vague. So big takeaway here is that competition for the first click can actually help consumers by pushing more information into the open. And platforms can amplify this by making pre-vetted info policies visible and apparent. So I hope I did it good. And yeah, we can move to the questions now. So, Professor Whitmer, what first motivated you to study attraction versus persuasion tension?
um, well, okay, so it the paper it builds off of is a really nice paper by Martin Weitzman. Um, um, Now I'm forgetting the name of the. It's like ordered search for the best alternative. And anyway, it's a paper from the I think 70s. Weitzman. So I really like this paper, but what the paper does is it solves the non-strategic search problem for the searcher. Um, so the solution is really cool. The problem is you have these different boxes with random values. There's a searcher. The searcher has to decide which um, order to search and then when to stop. And Weitzman shows it has this really clean solution where you just assign an index to each box and you search in decreasing order of the indices and stop whenever the value you've drawn is higher than the remaining indices. So I really like this paper, and I had this question of what if we took the boxes perspective? So we know what the searcher is going to do, but what if instead we think about the boxes and we think about the boxes themselves choosing their distributions, and then the natural application is to firms in a market trying to convince a consumer to pick them. But basically the idea was, what if we give this agency to the boxes and let them, given how the consumer will ultimately search, let's endogenize their values.
Uh-huh, got it. Um, so let's pretend that you run a major platform for a month. So what single rule about what sellers must show before we click would you add and why?
So, okay, so I think this would, it would depend on whether they would set prices as well. So on some platforms, firms don't really have price setting power, or at least they're, you know, significantly constrained. Other platforms, they really can do both. They can choose what information to provide, and also, you know, what prices to set. So I have another paper that with the same co-author, Al Pacron, that builds off the one we're talking about, where we add in prices as well. And I think there the kind of there we look at whether you want what do we look at? We look at whether you want firms to be able to advertise what information they will show the consumer when she visits. So we look at two cases, one in which the consumer has to anticipate what information she'll see, and a second in which the firms can just say, look, I will, you know, fully reveal your value if you visit, and so on. And what we show is that, and this is also true in the original attraction versus persuasion paper, if firms can't advertise what information they provide, then search breaks down, because, and this is regardless of whether there are prices or not, because basically what happens is that the consumer's search is guided by what she thinks she'll see, but the Weitzman search policy introduces a little wedge. And there's a wedge because, you know, a consumer is paying a search cost to visit a firm. And so given that she's paying the cost, she has to benefit from paying this cost. But this means that if firms could secretly change the information they provided, they would always want to provide a little less than the consumer anticipated. And this is because of the persuasion incentive you mentioned when introducing it. When they're not advertising what they will show, there's no attraction incentive anymore. Okay. So there's this unraveling, and it turns out that regardless of whether there are prices, there's no search. Excuse me, the consumer visits just one firm and then stops. Okay, so let's then, so in order to get search, you have to be able to commit initially, because you have to. That's what engenders the attraction incentive. Okay, so then let's think about the platform, and let's suppose that the platform cares about the consumer, or, you know, that's the goal. The goal of the platform is to maximize consumer welfare. It's not obvious that this is the platform's goal, right? Because maybe they charge producers the fees, and if they're profit maximizing, there's no reason to expect that they want to maximize consumer welfare. But anyway, let's suppose that we, the regulatory agency, want to maximize consumer welfare, and so I guess we can tell the platform what to do. So when there are prices, and information, and remember that I said, depending on whether information is posted or not, either you have search or you don't. And so the first question is, well, which is better for consumers? And it turns out that actually it's not obvious, because on the one hand, if information isn't posted, there's no search. But if prices are still observable, even though there's no search, there's still price competition. And it's in fact very intense price competition, because only one will be visited. So there's very intense price competition. On the other hand, if there is search, so information is posted, the consumer is now getting a better match value with the product, but the price competition is dampened. So it turns out the answer is, well, it depends. If there are not many firms in the market, the platform actually would rather forbid firms from being able to post information, because it intensifies the price competition. On the other hand, if the market is thick, so there are lots of firms, then the benevolent regulator would rather allow for information to be posted because there's already enough price competition because there are a lot of firms. So this was a very, very long answer, and the answer is if the market is thin, then and there are prices, then a thing a regulator could do to make consumers better off is actually not let firms advertise what they'll show the consumer. Back to the original environment without prices. There, I think the regulator would always want, because without prices, there's not this kind of lever. I think without prices, the regulator would always want to make it easy for firms to credibly promise what information they'll show. Because in that environment as well, if firms can't commit to what they'll show, there's no search. But this is very bad for consumers because now they're not getting a good fit. There's no price competition anyway. So this is basically the worst thing that could happen. So what the regulator wants to do is the regulator always wants it so that firms can credibly, promise that they'll provide information. One of the examples we have is test drives for cars or software trials. The regulator should make it so that it's credible for the firm to say, come visit us and we'll let you test drive our car. So, an answer.
Yep, sure. Works. Thanks a lot. So my last question for my paper would be that your model says that competition plus decent average quality pushes full disclosure.
Yeah.
So which margin do you think matters more in practice? More competition, more rivals, or better expected quality?
That's a good question. Probably. Well, I mean, I don't know about matters, but it seems like the effective competition seems more, I don't know, convincing to me because the real world, what is quality? Why do consumers have this correct view of the average quality out there? I don't know. Whereas, competition, I think it's more reason, like that's just a number you can observe. You know how many firms are in the market, or roughly. So vaguely, I think the comparative static with respect to number of firms in the market is stronger. I don't know. It seems more like a real comparative static.
Thanks a lot. That's all by me, and we'll move to the word of Abel.
Yes, sure. Thanks a lot for your insights. But I would like to ask a questions from a different paper, which is relative performance concerns among investment managers. So, if you don't mind, I can introduce in a few sentences the work and then ask questions. So, yeah. So basically, the idea of this paper is that when investment managers are evaluated and rewarded based on relative performance, here I mean beating a benchmark or peers, it can meaningfully distort their risk taking and therefore impact investor outcomes. So, your analysis reveals a unique equilibrium where more risk tolerant managers do not always take more risk, which is kind of counterintuitive, but yeah, though the paper doesn't define clear conditions for when the normal pattern returns. Yep, I guess I didn't miss any points.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. Yeah.
So yeah. Uh, so my question is, so that your paper finds a counterintuitive result. So more risk tolerant managers don't always take more risk. So can you unpack this intuition and when that reversal shows up?
So I wrote this paper a long time ago, so I hopefully won't say anything wrong. But what I remember, so what I remember is happening for this result is that, so these managers are competing, right? And they're competing dynamically because they have this portfolio of assets. They're choosing how much to allocate to this portfolio, and they have these relative concerns where not just their wealth matters, but also their relative wealth. So there's a benefit to being ahead of your competitor. And so, I think so they always have access to a safe, risk-free asset, and they always have access to some risky asset. And so I think what drives the kind of counterintuitive result is that there's, in a sense, endogenous risk that's being generated by the strategies of their opponents. And so in a sense, depending on the correlation of the risky assets, and because of the relative concerns, it could very well be at equilibrium that investing more in the risky asset exposes you to less risk. So this is what's driving the more risk-averse person to essentially take on more risks, because at equilibrium, given the strategy of the opponents, this is effectively less risk overall in the domain they care about, which is the relative concerns. So but it's very important that they have these interdependent preferences, that they have these relative concerns, because again, this is what's driving it. The fact that the other person is choosing this investment strategy as well. It turns out that at equilibrium, it's actually less risky for you to invest more. Hence, this kind of flipped comparative static. Does that make sense? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's pretty much clear. What about what specific conditions make risk-taking line up again with risk tolerance in your equilibrium specifically?
Let me think. So I think the easiest, I think it was if I think if our assets are not very correlated, I think the less correlated they are, the bigger the region of other parameter values that so this is either right or I have it flipped, but I think it's right. I think the less correlated the risky assets we have access to are, the bigger the range of other parameters for which the comparative static is what you'd expect. So I think if it's very correlated, then we can see this weird phenomenon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Again, this is either right or it's totally wrong, but I think it's right.
Got it. No, that's okay. So my next question would be about information versus incentives. So if one manager has a small information edge, do relative incentives magnify or kind of mute the value of that edge? So in other words, does the informed manager go bigger or play more safe?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know. I don't think my results in that paper can answer that. I think that's a really interesting question. I'm sure it could be answered. Um, I mean, it's difficult to even guess because you know, this is an equilibrium of a game, and so yeah, it's I don't know. I think this broad question too is interesting, which is that kind of how does greater competition, because that's basically what relative concerns are doing. It's becoming more competitive. How does greater competition shape information incentives? And I'm really not sure. I think it's really interesting.
Got it. Yeah, that's okay.
So if you like the relative performance concerns paper, Philip Strack uh, has a lot of his early work was on kind of similar things. So check some of his early stuff out, because I think he's interested in similar kinds of questions. Lately, I mean, more recently, he's done very different things, but early on, I think he was very interested in competition. He has this really nice paper that's still a working paper that looks at a kind of general investment contest that includes as a special case like the Black Scholes world, and he finds some really cool stuff in there. This is a working paper of his, but it's been around for years. Yeah, no, but anyway, your question was a really good one. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, all right. So my next question, one of my last questions would be about mandate heterogeneity. So how do your results change if funds differ in mandates, such as like ESG screens, short sale bans, and etc.? So does heterogeneity stabilize or destabilize the equilibrium?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is where we come back to one of my early answers, which is that I'm not sure I could even solve the model with that much more heterogeneity. Because I do appeal to symmetry in the various derivations. I mean, this is a cheap answer, and the cheap answer is to say I don't know because I can't solve it. I mean, another kind of cheap answer would be to say, well, it depends how much these other things blunt or exacerbate the relative performance concerns. And I could see it going either way. So in some sense, they could intensify the importance of finishing or being ahead of your opponents. In some sense, it could devalue the importance of being above your opponents. It just yeah, it just depends on the exact details of the policy change.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, Professor Whitmeyer, I guess that's all by us. Thanks a lot for joining. Thanks a lot for your contribution. Um, so yes, we don't have any other questions. It was pretty insightful to talk with you. Thanks a lot one more time for your contribution.